think the reason I'm here is because my own research, and currently I'm a professor at the Yale School of Management, building leader development architectures over their business school. But my own research interest is in leadership in dangerous contexts, and what does it mean to lead when people are afraid for their lives. I was in the Army 34 years. The last 12, I was the chairman of the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership at West Point. I was disappointed in the level of knowledge they had about this topic, and so in 2003, I started doing research by taking a four-man team to Iraq in April and May of 2003 while we were fighting our way into Baghdad. I interviewed more than 170 people in the war zone, both Iraqi and U.S., about their leadership, about their leaders. This is a follower study. You know, it's really not up to you or your style or the leader. It's what followers need. It's what your staff needs, what your patients need. I followed up with 4 other studies, a trust study in Mosul, Iraq. I did a study comparing the most experienced people on the West Point parachute team with team captains from non-dangerous sports. And I coached that team for 11 years. I made more than 1,000 jumps with cadets out of helicopters. And then finally I did an interview study with people who you would categorize as leaders in extremis at the point of death. So these were SWAT team chiefs, large formation skydiving organizers, a woman who took HD video teams into the Indian tiger preserves, videotaped tigers on the ground, climbing guides from the Exum School at Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And every bit of research I did was focused on how is leadership different when people are afraid for their lives. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. To me, what's happened in your profession is that it's really expanded and matured to a point where in order to get it to the next level, everybody has to get beyond technician. Everybody has to get to a point where leaders are making decisions, are doing things that haven't been done before, where people are taking charge of the delivery of services and doing it in a way that's further advanced, because the stakes are very high. And in this particular case, which is clinical, I mean, you see it in this sort of, rarefied form. You have all the elements of in extremis leadership, all the elements of leading in contexts where people's lives are at risk. So I'm going to be able to talk to you a little bit more about this. I'm going to tell you what the research found, tell you about the framework that we developed for understanding this. But my main aim right now is to get you to think a little bit about what it takes from getting from a technical perspective to the point where it's all about leadership. It's all about moving things forward in a way that other people have not beforehand, because you really are at a turning point in your profession over the next few years, and there are a lot of people, just like Channing Moss, depending on you all getting it right. So I promised I'd tell you a little bit more about the fruits of this research and connect it a little more to what you're doing. So we took these interviews. We really were trying to stay close to our data. So we had them content analyzed and developed quantitative evidence for how leadership is different. And I'm not a theoretician. I mean, I spent most of my time, most of my life running organizations rather than being a professor. But I do believe in good descriptive research. So the first thing we found was that people who operate in these kinds of environments have to be very good at gauging other people's level of arousal, other people's motivation, and then complementing that. Yellers and screamers don't do very well in these environments because people are already spun up. They need someone who can calm them down. The second thing we found is that these individuals, people that do this regularly, people who are in occupations like yours, are learners. They're not high motivators, they're learners because they're focused on the environment. And in fact, in clinical environments, the way they manage their emotions is through outward focus by staying in their prefrontal cortex as opposed to digging around in that amygdala when somebody doesn't do something quite right. And so both learning and controlling emotions are natural for people that are good at this. The next thing we found is that the people who are following them are really looking for someone that has an investment, some sort of skin in the game, some kind of shared risk or commitment. The fourth thing we found was that people are looking for a reduction in social distance when things go wrong. When things go wrong. So all of us, because of our status and because of our role, manage our social distance away from other people sometimes, which is fine when things are going well. But when they go badly, what people need is to get closer to their leaders. And often leaders do just the opposite. That's when the closed-door meetings happen or when they're not really talking about what's going on. And then lastly, we uncovered a relationship between competence and loyalty and the eventual trust that these leaders were able to build. Now, any leadership researcher, if they came to you and they said, well, competence, loyalty, and trust is important, that's kind of what my youngest daughter would call a no-duh. But in dangerous contexts, what happens is that competence factor goes way, way, way up. And people are much less concerned about the social capital that was built and more concerned about the ability of that person in the dangerous context. But competence alone is not enough. Competence alone won't build trust in these kinds of contexts. There has to be some indication that that leader has genuine concern for the people they're working with. At the clinical level, that might be patience. When you're operating broader administrative systems, that might mean other people who are working with you. But unless those two things are present, trust can't get built. And if you don't have trust, you can't operate in uncertainty, you can't innovate, you can't push beyond established procedures, established practices, and so forth. It's absolutely essential that you have both trust, that you have both competence and that caring factor in order to establish trust. In terms of connecting this with what you do, all of these things apply in systems that are going to deliver urgent care or critical care to people whose lives are on the line. And you will see these differences in your staffs, in yourself, and certainly in the patients who receive that kind of delivery. And so you have to think a little bit about what it means to lead in your profession. You're not dermatologists, okay? There's a difference. And so the way that you impact people makes a huge difference. Now, you've already seen statistics about how the delivery of care in certain ways affects patient outcomes. But I want to share with you something a little more personal and try to underscore for you what this means to people who receive your care, either at the clinical level or broadly across large administrative systems. And I'll tell you the same thing that I tell MBA candidates at Yale. I'm sure you're all great people. I don't care about you. Who I care about are the people who you lead, whether it's your staff or your patients, because that's what's going to make the difference in the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, what's represented out here by this group is the future of hundreds of thousands of people. Millions of people are treated in the systems that you all manage. It was driven home to me about 5 years ago. I was just finishing a presentation kind of like this at Babson College outside Boston. And I got an email from my daughter, who was 23 at the time. And it was to our whole family. And she said, I wanted to let you know that my general practitioner was concerned and sent me to a cardiologist. And I have something called idiopathic cardiomyopathy. And we don't know how I got it, but it's probably going to affect the way that I do things. And so we're off on this journey. And I'll tell you, when you get that out of the blue, it almost brings you to your knees. And what you're looking for is leadership. And she's married to an Army captain, so they've moved around a little bit. She's had a couple cardiologists, and I have seen the difference between cardiologists who know how to lead and who deliver care, and cardiologists that are really more like a technician, more like Danny Brown. And I've watched her spirits absolutely soar. I watched her have a baby. I watched her take her life back. In a year, she was one of the national spokeswomen for the Go Red for Women campaign for the American Heart Association. Every once in a while, I still see her on a billboard in a red dress, doing the AHA thing. But I could tell the difference immediately when she was working with someone who was not connected with her. Her dentist would say things like, "When did you start grinding your teeth?" And her view of the future would change, and I know it affects her health. So this is important stuff. My favorite quote, I've been in the military, I was in the military 34 years. I've studied leadership pretty much the whole time, got my PhD in 85. My favorite leadership quote is from Napoleon Bonaparte. Leaders are dealers in hope. So you all deliver services. You run large administrative systems, you do clinical work yourself. But at the end of the day, you're dealers in hope. And so in terms of this leadership business, and there may be some of you out there who are going to I can do my thing, I can put in a stent, but the idea of kind of managing these big systems is a little scary to me. Well, like I said before, you're not dermatologists. And when you raise your hand and you say you want to be in a profession like you're in, where people are depending on you to keep their hearts beating, you don't have the right to not get this right. You have to lead because people out there are depending on you. There is nobody else but you in this system that can take it to the next level. So I appreciate what you do. I am so grateful for you and people like you. But I'm telling you, people need you to do more than simply deliver services. They need you to be able to lead. And I thank you for that. My daughter thanks you for that. And it's inspiring me to be around you and to think about what you can do for people with the skills you have when you focus other people's efforts with your leadership. Thank you very much.